through the depths, you're going through your darkest hour, it's the hardest to believe that God has purpose in something. Yeah. And once again, I want to say, I don't think that's wrong to feel that. God understands that we are finite beings. He understands that suffering is painful. He knows personally. And, but we can't just make the assumption that God cannot use some of the most horrific situations and tragedies and use them for his glory use them for ultimate good.
Yeah.
I understand, I already know, some of the things that come to my mind of, how in the world could God use this horrific thing? I'm not saying that God condones horrific acts of sin. I'm not saying that he wants people to do them. I'm saying that God in his sovereignty can use them for his glory and for ultimate good. And that takes an incredible amount of faith.
Yeah.
It's believing that God allows certain things or doesn't intercede in certain situations because it's going according to his purposes.
Yeah.
It's having to trust him that good can come through it. Now we can understand this in small ways. We've seen where God has used tragedy to do good things, whether it's in the life of Joseph, right?
Sure.
But even outside of Scripture, you see in people's lives where they've had incredible faith and they've had a life of suffering, and then they've seen, but God used it to reach my family with the gospel, or to give me this ministry to be able to do this. God was glorified through my suffering.
Yeah.
That's on someone's journey of them experiencing that, but you have story after story of believers who have understood how God has used suffering and used tragedy and used sinful man and used natural disaster to propagate the gospel, to glorify God. And once again, that's easy to say when you're not in that moment. And
Absolutely.
I totally understand that. But that's the reality, is that God is eternal outside of time and space. And when we're in that darkest hour, even through the struggle, what God is leading us to is a stronger faith. What he's leading us to is a more substantial faith.
Yes.
I can't just trust an argument. I can't just trust some theological framework of thinking. I have to trust you.
Yeah.
And you alone. And once again, I'll reference A Grief Observed by C.S. Lewis. He was afraid that his faith was nothing but a mere house of cards. And when his wife died from cancer, it's like his faith just got knocked over. That's what he felt like. He felt like this house of cards fell over. And so he was like, man, am I fake? Is my faith even real? And as I'm processing this, am I just putting my house of cards back together that's just going to get knocked over again? But later in the book, he concluded in regards to that, he's like, you know what? My faith was a house of cards. And God knocked it down on purpose. Because he doesn't want my faith to be a house of cards. He doesn't want to be that flimsy. He wants me to have a strong faith. He wants me.
That's good.
And so at the end of that book with Lewis, he still had questions. He was still grieving, still had a hard time. And I want to make sure this, there is no, in a sense, getting over something.
Yeah.
Some of the stuff we have to go through our lives and process for our entire lives. But at the end of it, he knew that God was real. He knew that God loved him. He knew that God was sufficient in what he needed, even when he still had questions. But that's what he came through. But once again, this in looking at specific people. But you look at the apostles, you look at New Testament believers who the church was born into adversity, was born into persecution, being killed for just loving Jesus, right? And it's like, but they didn't cause them to doubt him.
No.
I'm not saying they didn't have questions, but people that were faithful unto death for Jesus, when they knew that God knew they'd be in that situation, and they didn't turn their back on God, and that they knew they could trust him. People who have been through great, awful things like the Holocaust, and have come through that with great faith and trusting God.
Yeah.
And so I say that to say it's not like it's some dagger to end Christianity or to prove atheism. Like, there's no God, because he's either not all powerful or he's not good. He definitely can't be both of those things, and if he's not, then he just must not exist, right? That's kind of that conclusion that of falling through. But it's the assumption that in his all-powerfulness and his goodness, that within the bed of fallen world that we live in, that he can't use it for good. It's an assumption that he can't do that. It's putting a limit on what God can accomplish, even through the most horrendous things. And Christians and believers throughout history, throughout the existence of the universe, that's never been a dagger of their faith.
No.
It's never ended God. It's never proved that he's not good or all-powerful. It's just a vain statement to make. It doesn't mean that you're not hurting. It doesn't mean you don't have questions. But it doesn't disprove God. No. It doesn't disprove his goodness. And so, once again, whether you're going through something now or maybe you'll go through something later, understand it doesn't mean God is not powerful. It doesn't mean that God isn't all good. And you can trust him.